Picture this for a second. You walk into a room full of people. Nobody introduces themselves. Nobody explains what they're thinking or how they're feeling. But within minutes, you already know. You can feel who's nervous. You can sense who's pretending. You can almost hear what people are thinking without a single word being exchanged. Sounds like a superpower, right? But here's the thing most people never realize. This isn't some rare gift. It's not a talent reserved for therapists, detectives, or that one friend who always just knows. It's a skill, a learnable, trainable, deeply human skill. And by the time you finish this, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. Because the truth is, people are broadcasting their thoughts every single second. Through the way they stand, the way they breathe, the way they blink, the way they pause before answering a simple question. Every micro movement is a whisper. And right now, most of those whispers are flying right past you. Not anymore. From this moment forward, you're going to start hearing what silence actually says. You're going to learn how to decode the invisible conversations happening all around you every day, in every room, with every person you meet. And once you do, trust me, the world will never look the same again. Let's start with the truth that changes everything. People lie with words constantly, not always on purpose, not always maliciously, but every single day people say things they don't fully mean. I'm fine. That sounds great. I totally agree. You've said those things yourself, haven't you? We all have. But here's where it gets fascinating. While our words can be carefully chosen, rehearsed, and filtered, our bodies operate on a completely different system. A system that runs deeper than language. A system that doesn't know how to lie. Think of it like this. Your words are like a text message. You can edit them, delete them, rewrite them before hitting send. But your body is a live broadcast. No editing, no delay, no filter. And once you learn to tune into that broadcast, you're accessing information that most people will go their entire lives without ever noticing. That's the gap. The space between what someone says and what their body reveals. That gap is where real understanding begins. And learning to read that gap, that's what separates someone who hears conversations from someone who truly understands them. Now, before we go any further, let me tell you something important. This is not about becoming suspicious of everyone around you. This is not about turning into some kind of human lie detector walking around judging people. Absolutely not. This is about connection. Deeper, more authentic, more meaningful connection. Because when you understand people better, when you really see them, you communicate better. You love better. You lead better. You avoid misunderstandings that destroy relationships. You become the kind of person others feel safe around because you actually get them. And honestly, in a world where most people feel unseen and unheard, becoming someone who truly notices, that's one of the most powerful things you can do. So let's begin where everything starts, with awareness. Here's a question that might surprise you. How much of a typical conversation do you actually observe? Not hear. Observe. Because those are two very different things. Most people walk through conversations like sleepwalkers. They catch the words, sure. They process the sentences. But the entire universe of nonverbal communication happening simultaneously, they miss almost all of it. They miss the way someone's shoulders tighten slightly when a certain name comes up. They miss the half-second pause before an answer that should have been instant. They miss the smile that appears on a mouth but never quite reaches the eyes. They miss the subtle lean backward just an inch or two when a topic makes someone uncomfortable. These aren't random movements. These are messages, clear, consistent, readable messages, and they're happening in every single interaction you have. The only reason you're not catching them yet is because nobody taught you where to look. Until now. The first principle you need to internalize is this. People are always communicating. Always. Even when their lips aren't moving. Even when they're sitting silently across the table from you. Even when they think they're giving nothing away. The human body is incapable of total silence. It's always transmitting through posture, through eye movement, through the rhythm of breathing, through the tension in the jaw, through 1,000 tiny signals that most people treat as background noise. Your job, starting today, is to stop treating it as noise. Start treating it as data. Now, let me give you your first real tool. It's called baseline observation, and it's the foundation of everything else you're going to learn. Here's how it works. Every person you know has a normal, a default way of being. Maybe your colleague Sarah is usually animated and talkative, always gesturing with her hands when she speaks. Maybe your friend David is typically calm, measured, speaks slowly and deliberately. Maybe your partner tends to make strong eye contact when they're engaged and looks at their phone when they're bored. That's their baseline, their natural state. And the reason it matters so much is this. You can only spot something unusual when you know what usual looks like. Imagine a heart monitor. That steady beep, 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 that's the baseline. Now imagine a sudden spike. You'd notice it instantly, right? Of course you would, because it's different from the pattern. Human behavior works the exact same way. When someone deviates from their baseline, when the talkative person goes quiet, when the calm person gets agitated, when the person who always makes eye contact suddenly looks away, that's your spike. That's your signal. That's where the real information is. And here's what makes this so powerful. You don't need any special training to start building baselines. You just need to pay attention. Next time you're with someone you know well, just watch. Not in a creepy way, not in an analyzing way. Just notice. How do they normally sit? How fast do they typically talk? How much do they usually gesture? How often do they make eye contact? Build that mental picture, then when something shifts, and it will, you'll catch it. And that catch? That's the beginning of reading minds. Now let me introduce the second foundational concept. It's called cluster reading, and this is where most beginners get it wrong. See, when people first start paying attention to body language, they tend to grab onto single signals and run wild with them. She crossed her arms. She must be defensive. He looked away. He must be lying. She touched her neck. She must be nervous. Hold on. Slow down. A single signal by itself is almost meaningless. Crossed arms might mean defensiveness. Or it might mean the room is cold, or it might just be comfortable. Looking away might mean deception, or it might mean they're accessing a memory, or they're distracted by something behind you. The real information doesn't come from one signal. It comes from clusters, groups of signals that all point in the same direction. When someone crosses their arms and shifts their posture away from you, And their voice gets slightly tighter, and they start giving shorter answers. Now you've got a cluster. Now you've got something real. Think of it like weather prediction. One dark cloud doesn't mean a storm, but dark clouds plus dropping temperature plus rising wind plus humidity, now you know what's coming. Body language works the same way. Multiple signals converging on the same emotional state, that's your forecast. So remember this rule. Never, ever make a judgment based on a single behavior. Always look for the cluster. Always look for multiple signals confirming the same thing. That's what separates a good observer from a bad one. Let's go deeper now. Let's talk about something most people never think about, but it's happening in every conversation you've ever had. Emotional congruence. When someone's words match their emotions, when what they're saying aligns with how they feel, everything flows. The conversation feels natural. Their tone matches their message. Their face matches their words. Their body supports their statements. Everything is congruent, consistent, aligned. But when there's a mismatch, that's where things get really interesting. Someone tells you, "I'm so excited about this opportunity," but their voice is flat. Their eyes don't light up. Their body doesn't lean forward. Something is off, right? You can feel it even if you can't articulate why. That feeling, that subtle sense that something doesn't match, that's your built-in incongruence detector. And it's already working. You just haven't learned to trust it yet. Here's the beautiful thing. Your brain is already picking up on these mismatches. It's been doing it your whole life. Every time you've had a gut feeling about someone, something feels off about that person, or I don't know why, but I just don't trust what they said. That was your brain processing incongruent signals below your conscious awareness. All we're doing now is bringing that process into the light, making the unconscious conscious, turning instinct into insight. Now, let's talk about one of the most revealing areas of the human body, the eyes. You've probably heard the saying, the eyes are the windows to the soul. It's been repeated so many times it almost sounds meaningless. But strip away the cliché, and there's something genuinely profound here. The eyes communicate on a level that very few other body parts can match. Eye contact patterns alone can tell you volumes. When someone holds natural, comfortable eye contact with you, it generally signals engagement, interest, and connection. But notice the word natural, because forced eye contact, the kind where someone stares a little too intensely, holds it a little too long, that's different. That often signals an attempt to project confidence they don't actually feel, or an effort to appear trustworthy when they're not being entirely honest. On the other end of the spectrum, sudden avoidance of eye contact, especially during a specific question or topic, often signals discomfort, not necessarily deception. Maybe shame, maybe vulnerability, maybe a memory that hurts, but something is happening internally that makes direct visual connection feel unsafe in that moment. Then there's blink rate. Most people never even think about this, but blinking speeds up under stress and emotional pressure. It's one of those automatic nervous system responses that we have almost zero conscious control over. So if you're having a conversation and someone's blink rate suddenly increases when a certain topic comes up, something is activated internally. File that information. And here's something truly powerful about the eyes. Pupil dilation. When we see something or someone we find appealing, whether it's an attractive person, an exciting idea, or even a piece of chocolate cake, our pupils actually dilate. They get bigger. It's an involuntary response. And while it's subtle, and you won't always catch it, knowing it exists gives you another channel of information that most people never access. Now, let me introduce a concept that will fundamentally change how you experience silence. Because here's something most people completely miss. Silence is not empty. Read that again. Silence is not empty. In fact, silence might be the single most information-rich moment in any conversation. When someone pauses before answering a question, that pause is packed with meaning. It could be careful thought. It could be emotional processing. It could be internal editing, choosing what to say and what to hold back. It could be hesitation born from discomfort. Whatever it is, that pause is not dead air. It is alive with information. And here's the mistake almost everyone makes. They rush to fill it. The moment silence appears, people panic. They jump in with another question, or they offer their own answer, or they change the subject entirely. And in doing so, they destroy the very moment that could have revealed the most. Don't do that. Let silence breathe. Get comfortable with pauses, because in those pauses, people often reveal more than they ever intended. Sometimes they'll fill the silence themselves, and what they fill it with is almost always more honest than their initial answer would have been. Sometimes they'll show emotion on their face that they would have hidden if the conversation had kept moving. Sometimes the silence itself is the answer. Master this one skill, the ability to hold space in silence, and you'll be miles ahead of almost everyone around you. As you start applying these foundations, baseline observation, cluster reading, emotional congruence, eye patterns, and the power of silence, something remarkable begins to happen. You develop a kind of conversational superpower, not the flashy movie kind, something quieter, something more real. You start sensing the emotional temperature of a room before anyone speaks. You start noticing when someone's words don't match their energy. You start feeling shifts in conversations, tension rising, comfort building, interest fading, before they become obvious. You start anticipating reactions before they happen. Not because you're psychic, because you're finally paying attention to the information that was always there. And here's what makes this so rewarding. When you understand people at this level, you don't just observe better, you connect better. You ask better questions. You give better responses. You create safer spaces for honesty. You become the person people feel understood by. And in a world full of distraction and shallow interaction, that is genuinely rare. But I want to be clear about something. This power comes with responsibility. Understanding people's unspoken emotions is a privilege, not a weapon. The moment you use this knowledge to manipulate, control, or exploit someone, you've betrayed the very foundation of what makes it valuable. This is about empathy, about compassion, about seeing people more fully and responding with more wisdom. Because in the end, the greatest readers of human behavior are not the ones who catch the most signals. They're the ones who use what they see to build deeper, more authentic human connections. And that's exactly what you're building right now. So as you move forward, carry this with you. You're not trying to be perfect. You're not trying to read every signal flawlessly. You're simply training yourself to notice what's always been there. the silent language every person speaks, whether they know it or not. And trust me, once you start hearing it, conversations will never feel the same again. Now that you've built the foundation, baseline observation, cluster reading, emotional congruence, the language of eyes, and the hidden power of silence, it's time to go deeper. Because what you've learned so far, that's the surface layer. Important, yes. Essential, absolutely. But there's a whole world underneath that most people never reach. And that world is where real understanding lives. Let's start with something that might blow your mind a little. Your brain is already detecting signals you're not consciously aware of. Right now, every day, in every conversation, your subconscious is picking up on facial flickers, vocal shifts, postural changes, and energy fluctuations that your conscious mind completely ignores. That gut feeling you sometimes get about someone, that uneasy sense that something isn't right, even though you can't explain why, that's not mystical intuition. That's your brain processing behavioral data below the level of awareness. What we're doing here is pulling that process up into the light, making the invisible visible. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is through something called microexpressions. Now, let me explain what these are, because once you understand them, you'll start seeing things you've never noticed before. A microexpression is a facial expression that lasts for a fraction of a second, sometimes as brief as 1/25th of a second. It flashes across someone's face and vanishes before they even realize it happened. And here's what makes microexpressions so extraordinary. They are involuntary, completely involuntary. They happen before the brain has time to apply any filter, any mask, any social correction. Think about that for a moment. In a world where people carefully manage their words, monitor their tone, and control their body language, there exists this tiny window of absolute honesty. A fraction of a second where the face reveals exactly what the person is feeling with zero editing. A quick flash of anger tightening the jaw. A microsecond of fear widening the eyes. A brief flicker of disgust pulling the upper lip. A split second of genuine surprise raising the eyebrows before the person composes themselves. These are emotional truths escaping before the conscious mind can build its walls. Now, here's the honest part. Catching microexpressions is not easy. Not at first. They're fast. Incredibly fast. Most people miss them entirely, which is exactly why they're so valuable. Because the information they carry is unfiltered. It's the emotional equivalent of someone accidentally thinking out loud. But here's the encouraging part. Your ability to spot them improves dramatically with practice. It's like learning to see wildlife in a forest. The first time you walk through, you see trees and bushes, nothing else. But after you've walked that path 50 times, you start noticing birds you missed, insects you overlooked, animal tracks you walked right past before. The wildlife was always there. Your perception just wasn't trained to catch it. The same applies here. Start by simply watching people's faces more carefully during conversations. Not staring, just observing. Pay special attention to the moments right after you ask a question, right after you share news, right after a topic changes. Those transition points are when microexpressions are most likely to appear, because transitions catch people off guard. The brain is busy processing new information, and for that split second, the mask slips. You might be sitting across from someone who appears perfectly calm, perfectly composed, perfectly in control. But right after you mention a particular name or topic, you catch it. A brief tightening around their eyes, a momentary clench of the jaw, a flash of something that disappears as quickly as it came. That wasn't nothing. That was truth making a brief, unscheduled appearance. And once you start catching these moments, your understanding of people jumps to an entirely different level. Now, let's shift focus to something equally powerful, but far more visible: body orientation. Here's a principle that will serve you for the rest of your life. The body points where the mind wants to go, not where politeness says it should go, not where social convention directs it, where it actually wants to go. This is especially noticeable in the feet. And yes, I know that sounds strange. Most people, when they think about reading body language, focus on the face and hands. Those are important, absolutely. But the feet? The feet are the most honest part of the body, precisely because nobody thinks to control them. Here's what I mean. You're at a gathering, talking to someone. Their face is turned toward you. They're nodding. They're saying all the right things. But look down. Where are their feet pointing? If their feet are angled toward the door or toward another person or toward anywhere that isn't you, their mind is already leaving the conversation. They may be too polite to say it, but their feet just did. Conversely, when someone's entire body is oriented toward you, feet facing you, shoulders squared, torso open, that's genuine engagement. Their physical architecture saying, "You have my full attention. I'm here. I'm invested in this moment." And that kind of full body alignment is remarkably hard to fake, because most people simply don't think about their lower body during conversation. Now extend this principle beyond feet. Look at shoulder alignment. When someone's shoulders are parallel to yours, facing you directly, it creates a sense of connection and openness. But when one shoulder turns away, even subtly, it can signal partial disengagement. The person might still be listening, but part of them has already started to withdraw. Watch for torso lean as well. A forward lean generally indicates interest and engagement. When someone is genuinely invested in what you're saying, they naturally orient their center of gravity toward you. It's almost gravitational. Attention pulls the body forward. But a backward lean? That often signals evaluation, skepticism, or the desire for distance. Not always negative, but definitely worth noting. And here's a subtle one that most people completely miss: head tilt. When someone tilts their head slightly during conversation, it's often a sign of curiosity or genuine listening. Animals do this too. Think of a dog hearing an unusual sound, tilting its head to process it better. Humans do the same thing. A slight head tilt during your words often means they're genuinely trying to understand, genuinely processing what you're saying. It's one of the quieter signals of authentic engagement. Now, let's layer in another dimension: proximity. The physical distance between people during conversation is a silent but powerful communicator. Every person carries an invisible boundary around them. Think of it as a personal atmosphere, a zone of comfort that expands and contracts based on emotional state. When someone feels safe, comfortable, and connected, that zone naturally shrinks. They move closer. They reduce the gap. It's instinctive, almost magnetic. But when someone feels uncertain, uncomfortable, or threatened, even slightly, that zone expands. They create space. They step back. They angle their chair slightly further away. They cross their legs in the direction away from you. These distance adjustments are rarely conscious decisions. They're emotional reflexes. Now, the really interesting part isn't the distance itself. It's the change in distance. If someone starts a conversation at a comfortable distance and gradually moves closer, that's growing comfort and trust developing in real time. You're watching connection form. But if someone starts close and gradually creates more space, leaning back, shifting their chair, angling their body, something is causing them to retreat. Maybe the topic, maybe the energy, maybe something they sensed in you. Either way, the movement tells the story. Here's a practical tip that most people overlook. In group settings, watch how proximity shifts when different people speak. You'll notice that people unconsciously lean toward voices they find interesting or trustworthy and subtly shift away from voices that create tension or boredom. These movements are tiny, inches, not feet, but they paint a remarkably accurate picture of group dynamics. And there's another element closely connected to proximity: touch, or more specifically, the presence or absence of touch. In comfortable, connected interactions, brief touches happen naturally. A light touch on the forearm to emphasize a point, a pat on the shoulder in greeting, a warm handshake that lasts just a beat longer than strictly necessary. These touches are social glue. They signal trust, warmth, and emotional openness. But when touch disappears entirely, when someone keeps their hands firmly to themselves, maintains strict physical boundaries, or pulls away from accidental contact, that's information too. It might signal formality, discomfort, distrust, or simply a personality that prefers more space. As always, context determines meaning, but the pattern itself is always worth noting. Now, let's move into something that carries enormous emotional information but often gets overlooked entirely. The voice. Not the words, the voice itself, the instrument behind the words. Because the human voice is one of the most emotionally transparent channels we have, and most people pay almost no attention to it. Think about how much information is encoded in vocal quality alone: pitch, high versus low, pace, fast versus slow, volume, loud versus quiet, rhythm, smooth versus choppy, resonance, full versus thin, steadiness, stable versus wavering. Each of these carries emotional meaning, and they shift constantly throughout conversation. A person who feels confident typically speaks with a steady, measured pace. There's a groundedness to their voice. It doesn't rush, doesn't waver, doesn't climb in pitch at the end of statements. Confidence sounds like stability. A person who feels nervous often speaks faster, as if trying to get their words out before something goes wrong. Their pitch may rise slightly. Their rhythm becomes less predictable. There might be more filler words. Like, as the brain scrambles to process anxiety and produce speech simultaneously. A person who feels uncertain often drops their volume at the end of sentences, almost as if their conviction fades as they reach the conclusion of their own thought. The sentence starts strong but ends in a whisper. That trailing off is the sound of doubt expressing itself in real time. But here's where vocal analysis gets really powerful. It's not the static qualities that matter most. It's the changes. If someone has been speaking calmly and steadily for 10 minutes, and suddenly their pitch rises or their pace quickens when a specific topic comes up, That shift is a signal. Something about that topic activated an emotional response. Maybe anxiety, maybe excitement, maybe defensiveness. The content alone doesn't tell you, but the vocal shift does. Pay special attention to what I call voice breaks. These are moments where someone's vocal quality suddenly and briefly changes. A slight crack, a catch in the throat, a momentary thinness, a sudden drop in energy. Voice breaks often occur at points of genuine emotion, when the feeling is strong enough to momentarily disrupt the controlled output of speech. They're the vocal equivalent of microexpressions, brief, honest, and incredibly revealing. Now, let's weave in something that ties all of these elements together. Timing. Timing is the invisible architecture of every conversation, and it carries more information than most people ever realize. Not just what people say, when they say it. Not just what they do, when they do it. Here's what I mean. When you ask someone a straightforward question and they answer immediately, without pause, it generally suggests one of two things. Either they're being spontaneously genuine, or the answer was pre-prepared. The speed itself doesn't tell you which, but it's a data point. Now, when you ask the same kind of straightforward question and there's a pause, even a short one, something different is happening. The brain is engaging in additional processing. That processing could be recall. It could be emotional management. It could be filtering, deciding what to include and what to leave out. It could be fabrication. The pause alone doesn't tell you exactly what's happening, but it tells you something is happening beyond simple recall. And here's a subtle timing signal that most people completely miss. Delayed reactions. Sometimes a person will hear something, a piece of news, a question, a statement, and their reaction appears a beat late. Not the immediate instinctive response, a processed one. That delay, even if it's just half a second, suggests the person is filtering their reaction. They felt something instantly, but chose not to show it immediately. Instead, they produced a managed response. Now, combine timing awareness with everything else you've learned. Imagine you're in a conversation. You ask a question. You notice a slight pause before the answer. That's timing. You catch a brief tightening around their eyes. That's a microexpression. Their shoulders angle slightly away. That's body orientation. Their voice drops slightly in volume. That's vocal shift. They lean back almost imperceptibly. That's proximity change. Any single one of these signals alone? Probably meaningless. But all of them together, clustered around the same moment, pointing in the same direction? That's a story. That's your cluster speaking loud and clear. And now you know something that was never spoken aloud. That's the magic of this. Not any one element. The convergence of multiple elements at the same moment. Let me share a principle that will keep you grounded as you develop these skills. I call it the context compass, because every single signal we've discussed, microexpressions, body orientation, proximity, voice, timing, every one of them is context dependent. The same behavior can mean entirely different things in different situations. Crossed arms at a funeral, probably self-comfort. Crossed arms during a business negotiation, possibly defensiveness. Crossed arms while waiting for a bus in winter, just cold. A pause before answering a personal question could be emotional processing. A pause before answering a trivia question, probably just thinking. A pause before answering, "Do you want pizza?" Maybe they're just deciding between pizza and sushi. Context is the lens through which every signal must be interpreted. Without it, you're just collecting data with no framework. With it, every signal becomes meaningful. So always ask yourself, what's the context here? What's the situation? What's the relationship? What's the emotional environment? Because the same gesture in a different context can tell a completely different story. Now, before we move forward, I want to address something important. As you start applying these skills in real conversations, you might feel an urge to analyze everything, every blink, every breath, every micro movement. And at first, that's natural. It's like learning to drive. In the beginning, you're consciously aware of every action, checking mirrors, watching the speedometer, thinking about the clutch. But over time, it becomes automatic, effortless. You stop thinking about the mechanics and just drive. Reading behavior works the same way. Right now, it feels like a lot of separate skills to manage. But with practice, it all merges into a single flow of awareness. You won't need to consciously catalog every signal. You'll just feel the conversation more completely. You'll sense shifts before you can name them. You'll notice patterns before you can explain them. And here's what's beautiful about that stage. When observation becomes natural, when you stop forcing it and just let it flow, that's when it becomes most powerful. Because the moment someone feels like they're being studied or analyzed, their behavior changes. They become more guarded, more controlled, more performative. The signals become less honest. But when your observation is quiet, relaxed, effortless, people feel comfortable around you. They feel safe. They let their guard down. And that's when you see the most authentic behavior. That's when people reveal who they really are. So don't force it. Don't stare. Don't interrogate with your eyes. Just be present. Let your awareness expand naturally, like peripheral vision widening without effort. The best observers in the world don't look like they're observing at all. They just look like they're genuinely engaged in conversation. And they are. They're just engaged on more levels than most people realize. Here's one more thing I want you to carry into the next stage of this journey. Everything you're learning is cumulative. Each concept builds on the last. Baseline. Observation makes microexpressions meaningful. Cluster reading makes individual signals trustworthy. Emotional congruence makes voice patterns interpretable. Context makes everything accurate. You're not learning disconnected tricks. You're building an integrated system of human understanding. And that system gets stronger with every conversation you have, every interaction you observe, every moment of quiet attention you practice. So keep going. Keep watching. Keep listening, not just to words, but to the entire symphony of human expression playing out in every room you enter. Because we're just getting started. And what comes next goes even deeper. By now, you've started to see conversations differently. You're noticing signals you used to ignore. You're reading clusters instead of isolated gestures. You're sensing shifts in tone, timing, and body orientation that used to fly right past you. And that's incredible progress. But here's the thing. Everything we've covered so far has been about what you see, the external signals, the visible layer of human behavior. And while that layer is rich, incredibly rich, it's still just the surface. Now, we're going underneath. Because the real question isn't just, what is this person doing? The real question is, why are they doing it? And the answer to that question lives in a place most people never think to look: the emotional engine running beneath every human interaction. Once you understand what drives behavior, not just what behavior looks like, you move from observer to understander. And that shift, that's where everything changes. Let's start with the single most important psychological force shaping human behavior in social situations. If you remember nothing else from this entire journey, remember this one concept. It will explain more about people than any other principle you'll ever learn. Emotional safety. Every person you've ever met, every person you'll ever meet, is driven by one fundamental need during social interaction: the need to feel safe. Not physically safe, although that matters too, but emotionally safe. Safe from judgment. Safe from rejection. Safe from humiliation. Safe from being misunderstood. Safe from that horrible feeling of putting yourself out there and being met with coldness or criticism. This need is so deep, so primal, so universal, that it operates beneath conscious awareness for most people. They don't wake up in the morning thinking, "Today, I need to feel emotionally safe." But every conversation they have, every interaction they enter, every room they walk into, that need is running in the background, shaping everything. And here's why this matters so much for reading people. When emotional safety is present, when someone feels accepted, understood, and unjudged, their behavior opens up. They become more expressive, more authentic, more relaxed. Their baseline behavior becomes their real behavior. The mask comes off because there's no threat requiring it. But when emotional safety is threatened, even slightly, everything changes. The walls go up. Behavior becomes controlled. Words become calculated. Body language becomes guarded. And suddenly, what you're seeing isn't the person anymore. It's their defense system. And here's where it gets fascinating. Different people defend differently. Some become quiet. They withdraw, pull inward, reduce their presence. Others become loud. They overcompensate, talk more, take up more space, not because they're confident, but because volume is their shield. Some become aggressive. They attack first before they can be hurt. Some become overly agreeable. They say yes to everything, mirror your opinions, suppress their own thoughts, because agreeing feels safer than risking disagreement. These are all defense responses, and they all share the same root: a perceived threat to emotional safety. Once you understand this, you stop taking people's behavior at face value and start understanding the emotional architecture behind it. Let me give you a real-world example. Imagine you're in a group conversation. One person suddenly becomes sarcastic, dropping clever little jabs wrapped in humor. Most people would just think, "Oh, they're funny," or "they're kind of rude." But now you know better. You ask the deeper question: what is this behavior protecting? Often, sarcasm is a distance-creating mechanism. It allows someone to participate in conversation without being emotionally vulnerable. The humor creates a buffer zone, close enough to stay engaged, far enough to avoid genuine exposure. That person might be feeling insecure, threatened, or uncomfortable, and sarcasm is their way of managing that discomfort without admitting it exists. Does that mean every sarcastic person is secretly insecure? No. Context matters. Patterns matter. But understanding the protective function of sarcasm gives you a lens that most people don't have. Now let's explore something directly connected to emotional safety. Self-soothing behaviors. These are physical actions people perform unconsciously when they're experiencing internal discomfort, and they're absolutely everywhere once you know what to look for. Touching the face, rubbing the back of the neck, playing with hair, adjusting a watch or bracelet, smoothing clothing that doesn't need smoothing, pressing lips together, bouncing a leg, clicking a pen, interlocking fingers tightly. These aren't random nervous habits. They are the nervous system's attempt to create comfort when the mind feels uncomfortable. Think of it this way. When a child feels scared, what do? They might hug a stuffed animal, hold a blanket, suck their thumb. These are soothing behaviors, physical actions that create a sense of safety and comfort. Adults do the exact same thing. We just replace the stuffed animals with subtler substitutes. That pen you're clicking? That's your adult security blanket. That hair you keep tucking behind your ear? That's your nervous system trying to self-regulate. And here's why this matters for reading people. Self-soothing behaviors tend to increase when internal discomfort increases. So if you notice someone who was relatively still suddenly starts touching their face more, adjusting their clothing, or fidgeting with an object, something has shifted internally. Something in the conversation, a question, a topic, a tone, has activated discomfort. Again, remember the cluster principle. One self-soothing behavior alone doesn't mean much. But multiple self-soothing behaviors appearing together, especially at a specific moment in conversation, that's a pattern worth paying attention to. Now, let's move into something that will profoundly change how you interpret other people. And it starts with a challenging truth about yourself. Emotional projection. Here's something most people don't want to hear, but it's absolutely essential if you want to read people accurately. Sometimes, what you think you're seeing in someone else is actually a reflection of your own emotional state. Let me explain. When you're feeling anxious, you tend to interpret neutral behavior as negative. Someone gives a perfectly normal response, but because you're on edge, you read it as cold or dismissive. When you're feeling confident and happy, you tend to interpret the same neutral behavior as positive. Same response, completely different interpretation. The behavior didn't change. Your emotional filter did. This is emotional projection, and it's one of the biggest sources of misreading people. You're not seeing them clearly. You're seeing them through the lens of your own feelings. Here's a simple example. You send a text to a friend. They respond with, "Okay." If you're in a good mood, you read that as a perfectly fine response. Neutral, normal. But if you're feeling insecure or worried about the relationship, suddenly, "okay" feels cold, distant. You start reading tone into a single word that has no tone. You start projecting your internal state onto their external behavior. This is why self-awareness isn't just nice to have. It's absolutely critical for accurate people reading. Before you interpret anyone else's behavior, you need to first check your own emotional state. Ask yourself, am I reading them, or am I reading my own feelings reflected in them? The best observers in the world are the ones who can separate their own emotional state from their observations. They can be feeling anxious and still recognize that the other person's behavior is actually neutral. They can be feeling confident and still notice genuine signs of tension in someone else. This emotional separation is what creates accuracy. And here's the beautiful flip side. When you develop this self-awareness, you become better at reading yourself too. You start noticing your own patterns, how your body responds to stress, how your voice changes when you're uncomfortable, how your behavior shifts when you feel threatened. And that self-knowledge makes you even more attuned to the same patterns in others. Because here's the truth. The better you understand your own emotional machinery, the better you understand everyone else's. We're all running the same basic system. The expressions differ. The triggers differ. But the underlying mechanics are remarkably similar. Now, let's explore something that explains why people sometimes react in ways that seem completely disproportionate to the situation. Perception triggers. A perception trigger is anything. A word, a tone, a facial expression, a situation, even a smell that activates an internal emotional response based on past experience, not based on what's actually happening right now, based on something that happened before. Here's an example. You're having a perfectly calm conversation with someone. Everything is fine. Then you make a completely innocent comment. Maybe something like, "Well, you should have thought about that earlier." And suddenly, their entire energy shifts. They become defensive, maybe even hostile. And you're thinking, what just happened? All I said was, but here's what you didn't see. That phrase, "you should have thought about that," didn't land as a neutral observation. It landed as an echo. Maybe a parent used to say that exact phrase to them. Maybe a former boss. Maybe an ex-partner. That phrase is connected to a stored emotional memory, and your innocent use of it just triggered that entire emotional archive. This is why people sometimes overreact to things that seem small. They're not reacting to you. They're reacting to the accumulated weight of every time they've heard something similar. Your comment was the match, but the fuel was already there, stacked and waiting. Understanding this concept is transformational for reading people. Because when you see someone react disproportionately, instead of thinking, "that was weird," or "they're overreacting," you can think, "something in what I said or did activated a deeper response. This isn't about this moment. It's about a pattern from their past." You won't always know what the trigger is. You might never find out. But simply understanding that perception triggers exist allows you to respond with empathy instead of confusion. And that changes everything about how you handle those moments. Now, let's layer in another psychological driver that explains enormous amounts of human behavior: the need for control in the face of uncertainty. The human brain has a deep, almost obsessive need for certainty. We crave predictability. We want to know what's going to happen next, who we can trust, and where we stand. And when that certainty is taken away, when we don't know the answer, when we can't predict the outcome, when a situation feels ambiguous, the brain responds with anxiety. Sometimes mild, sometimes intense. And what does anxiety produce? Behavioral shifts. This is why some people over-explain things. They're not trying to bore you with details. They're trying to create order out of internal chaos. Explaining helps them organize their thoughts. It gives them a sense of control. It makes the uncertain feel more manageable. This is why some people repeat themselves. Not because they think you didn't hear them, because saying it again reinforces their own certainty. Repetition is a stabilizing mechanism for the anxious mind. This is why some people ask excessive questions, not because they're overly curious, because each answer reduces a tiny piece of uncertainty. Questions are information-gathering missions designed to make the unknown known. And this is why silence feels so uncomfortable for many people. Silence is the ultimate uncertainty. A gap with no information, no feedback, no data about what the other person is thinking. So they rush to fill it, not because they have something important to say, because empty space feels threatening. Once you understand this drive, you'll start seeing it everywhere. In the colleague who sends 3 follow-up emails. In the friend who keeps asking, "Are you sure you're not mad at me?" In the partner who needs to talk through every possible scenario before making a decision. These aren't annoying behaviors. They're coping strategies for managing the discomfort of not knowing. Now, let's talk about something that connects everything we've covered in this section. Emotional pacing. Every person has a natural emotional rhythm in conversation. Some people process quickly. They hear something, react immediately, move on. Others process slowly. They take things in, sit with them, respond after careful internal consideration. And some people fluctuate, fast in comfortable territory, slow when things get personal or complex. This rhythm is like an emotional heartbeat. And when you learn to feel it, you gain incredible insight into someone's internal state. Here's why this matters practically. When you match someone's emotional pace, conversation flows beautifully. If they're slow and reflective and you slow down with them, they feel understood. If they're quick and energetic and you match that energy, they feel met. Pacing alignment creates connection. But when pacing is mismatched, friction appears. If you're fast and they're slow, they feel rushed or overwhelmed. If you're slow and they're fast, they feel bored or impatient. Neither person is wrong. They're just operating at different emotional speeds. And recognizing that difference without judging it is a huge leap in understanding. Now, here's where emotional pacing becomes really powerful for reading people. When someone's natural rhythm suddenly changes, a person who normally responds quickly starts pausing. A person who normally thinks carefully starts blurting. A person who's usually measured becomes erratic. These rhythm disruptions are emotional earthquakes. The surface behavior is shaking because something has shifted deep underneath. Maybe the slow person is now excited about something and can't contain their energy. Maybe the fast person has encountered something that genuinely requires careful thought. Maybe the steady person has been hit with information they weren't prepared for. The specific cause varies, but the principle is constant. When the rhythm breaks, something significant is happening internally. Let me share one more concept before we close this section, because it's essential for everything that comes next. It's the difference between reaction and response. A reaction is immediate, instinctive, unfiltered. It happens before the person has time to think. A flinch, a gasp, a flash of emotion across the face, a sudden shift in posture. Reactions are honest because they bypass the thinking mind entirely. A response is what comes after. It's processed, filtered, considered. It's what the person chooses to say or do after their brain has had time to evaluate the situation. Responses can be honest too, but they've been through an editing process. Some information may have been softened. Some emotion may have been suppressed. Some truth may have been adjusted for social acceptability. The gap between reaction and response is one of the richest places to observe. That fraction of a second between what someone feels and what they choose to show. That's where authentic truth lives. And the better you get at catching the reaction, the unedited, unfiltered, instinctive first response, the closer you get to understanding what someone truly feels before their conscious mind steps in and cleans things up. So here's your practice for this stage. Start paying attention to first reactions. When you share news with someone, watch the very first thing that happens on their face, before their social smile appears, before their polite response forms, before their words catch up. That first flicker? That's the real answer. When you ask a question that catches someone slightly off guard, watch the very first body movement, before they lean back into their comfortable position, before they adjust their expression, before they formulate their careful reply. That initial movement, that's their nervous system speaking honestly. These moments are brief, they're subtle, and they're incredibly valuable, because they show you the unedited version of a person, the version that exists before social conditioning steps in. And once you get comfortable spotting the difference between reactions and responses, you'll have access to a layer of understanding that most people spend their entire lives without ever reaching. Here's something I want you to sit with as we prepare to go deeper. Everything you've learned in this section, emotional safety, self-soothing, projection, perception triggers, the need for control, emotional pacing, and the reaction-response gap, these aren't just observation techniques. These are windows into the human operating system. Every person you meet is running this same system. Different inputs, different experiences, different triggers, but the same fundamental machinery underneath. And the more familiar you become with that machinery, the less confusing people become. Not because they get simpler, because your understanding gets deeper. And that depth, that's what transforms you from someone who watches people into someone who truly understands them. So, carry this with you. You're not just learning to read behavior anymore. You're learning to read the emotional architecture that creates behavior. And once you can see the architecture, the building makes perfect sense. Let's keep going, because the next layer goes deeper still. Something is shifting in you right now. You can feel it, can't you? The way you think about conversations is already different from when you started. You're no longer just hearing words. You're seeing structures. You're sensing undercurrents. You're beginning to feel the emotional weather of a room before anyone announces it. And that shift, that quiet, internal expansion of awareness, is exactly what separates ordinary communicators from extraordinary ones. You're becoming someone who understands the invisible half of every conversation, the half that most people never even know exists. But we're not done, not even close, because now we're entering territory that changes not just how you read other people, but how you understand the entire dynamic between people, the invisible dance of emotion, power, rhythm, and adaptation that happens every single time two human beings interact. Let's begin with a concept that unlocks enormous insight once you truly grasp it: emotional layering. Here's something most people never consider. Humans almost never feel just one emotion at a time. Almost never. Instead, Emotions stack on top of each other like layers of paint on a canvas. On the surface, you might see confidence, but underneath that confidence might sit a thin layer of anxiety, and underneath that anxiety might rest a deeper layer of sadness. And underneath all of it, maybe hope, maybe fear, maybe both. This is emotional layering, and it's happening inside every person you talk to all the time. Now, why does this matter for reading people? Because when you only look at the surface layer, the emotion someone is presenting to the world, you're getting an incomplete picture. It's like looking at the cover of a book and thinking you know the whole story. The cover is real. It's part of the truth. But it's not the entire truth. The surface layer is usually the most socially acceptable emotion, the one the person feels comfortable showing. Confidence, happiness, calm, agreement. These are safe to display. They don't make anyone uncomfortable. They don't invite difficult questions. But underneath, that's where the real complexity lives. Someone might appear confident in a meeting, but their underlying anxiety causes them to over-prepare, over-explain, or seek excessive validation afterward. Someone might appear cheerful at a social gathering, but their underlying loneliness causes them to stay longer than everyone else, not because they're having fun, but because going home feels worse. And here's the key insight. Mixed signals, those confusing moments when someone seems to be sending contradictory messages, are almost always the result of emotional layering. Different layers are producing different signals simultaneously. The mouth smiles, while the eyes carry tension. The words say, "I'm fine," while the posture says, "I'm collapsing." The voice says, "I agree," while the body leans away. These aren't contradictions. They're different layers of truth expressing themselves through different channels at the same time. And once you understand that, mixed signals stop being confusing and start being incredibly informative. Because each signal is telling you about a different layer, and together they paint the full picture. So next time someone sends mixed signals, don't dismiss them as confusing. Read each signal as a separate layer. The smile is telling you one thing, the tension is telling you another. Both are true, both are real. They just live at different depths. Now, let's explore something that will completely change how you experience group conversations. Conversational dynamics. Every conversation, whether it's between two people or 20, has an invisible power structure. Someone is leading, someone is following, someone is competing, someone is withdrawing, someone is mediating, and these roles shift constantly throughout the interaction. Most people are completely oblivious to this structure. They participate in conversations without ever noticing who's actually driving them. But once you start seeing conversational dynamics, it's like putting on glasses for the first time. Everything becomes sharper, clearer, more defined. Here's how to start noticing. Ask yourself these questions during any group interaction. Who speaks first? The person who initiates is often, though not always, the one who feels most confident or has the most perceived authority in the group. Who speaks most? Volume of speech is often connected to perceived status or emotional need, but be careful. Sometimes the person who speaks most is not the most powerful. Sometimes they're compensating for insecurity. Who changes the topic? This is a subtle but incredibly revealing dynamic. The person who can successfully redirect a conversation, moving it from one subject to another without resistance, often holds significant social influence, whether they realize it or not. Who fills silence? When a pause appears in group conversation, who jumps in to fill it? That person often has the lowest tolerance for social uncertainty. They experience silence as vacuum, and they feel compelled to fill it. Who controls the ending? Pay attention to who wraps up conversations. Well, I should get going. Anyway, let's move on. The person who closes is often the one with the most social authority, or the one whose comfort level has been exhausted. And here's a particularly powerful one. Who do people look at when they laugh? In a group setting, when something funny happens, people instinctively look at the person they feel closest to, or the person whose approval they most desire. This is completely unconscious. Nobody thinks about it. Nobody plans it. But it reveals connection and social hierarchy in a single glance. These dynamics are operating in every group conversation you've ever been in, every meeting, every dinner party, every family gathering, every casual hang with friends. The roles might shift, the players might change, but the invisible structure is always there. And now that you know to look for it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Now, let's go deeper into something we touched on earlier, but haven't fully explored: behavioral consistency and what happens when it breaks. Consistency is the rhythm of personality. People tend to behave in predictable ways because personality is pattern. Your calm friend stays calm. Your animated colleague stays animated. Your cautious family member stays cautious. Not perfectly. Nobody is a robot, but with enough consistency that you develop expectations. And when those expectations are violated, that's signal. Pure, powerful signal. Think about this. If your usually talkative friend suddenly goes quiet during a group dinner, you notice. Of course you notice. The absence of their usual energy creates a gap, and that gap tells you something has changed internally. Maybe they received bad news earlier. Maybe something in the conversation triggered an emotional response. Maybe they're in conflict with someone at the table. You might not know the specific cause, but you know something is different, and knowing that is the first step toward understanding. Here's the deeper principle. People don't change behavior without internal cause. Every external shift in behavior has an internal origin. Quiet people don't suddenly become loud without reason. Confident people don't suddenly become hesitant without cause. Friendly people don't suddenly become cold without something driving that change. So when you notice a consistency break, when someone deviates from their established pattern, don't ignore it. Don't explain it away. Treat it as information. Something happened inside. You may not know what. You may not need to know. But the observation itself keeps you connected to what's really going on beneath the surface. And here's something subtle but important. The bigger the consistency break, the stronger the internal cause. A small deviation, someone being slightly less energetic than usual, might indicate mild fatigue or a minor mood shift. But a dramatic deviation, someone who is normally warm and open, becoming abruptly cold and withdrawn, that suggests something significant is happening underneath. The magnitude of the behavioral shift often mirrors the magnitude of the emotional shift. Now, let's move into something beautiful and deeply human. Emotional mirroring. When two people genuinely connect, when conversation flows, when trust develops, when both parties feel safe and engaged, something remarkable happens without either person trying. They begin to mirror each other. Their postures start aligning. One leans forward, the other follows. Their speaking pace begins to synchronize. One slows down, the other adjusts. Their vocal energy matches. Their gestures begin to echo. Their emotional temperature converges. It's like two instruments gradually tuning to the same frequency. This is not mimicry. It's not performance. It's unconscious emotional synchronization, and it's one of the oldest bonding mechanisms in human behavior. When two people mirror each other, it signals mutual comfort, mutual interest, and mutual engagement. It's the behavioral equivalent of being on the same wavelength. And here's why this matters for reading people. When mirroring is present, connection is genuine. You can feel it. The conversation flows without effort. There's a warmth, a rhythm, a sense of being understood. But when mirroring suddenly disappears, when two people who were in sync suddenly fall out of alignment, that's one of the clearest signals of disconnection you'll ever see. Something has shifted. Maybe a comment landed wrong. Maybe a topic created discomfort. Maybe trust was disrupted. Whatever the cause, the loss of mirroring is your emotional early warning system. It tells you that connection is weakening, often before either person consciously realizes it. So watch for synchronization in your conversations. When it's there, honor it. It means you're connecting genuinely. When it breaks, pay attention. Something needs addressing, even if nobody has said a word about it. Now, let's explore one of the most nuanced and valuable skills in behavioral reading: detecting resistance. Most people think of disagreement as something verbal. Someone says, "I don't agree." Clear, obvious, easy to spot. But genuine disagreement, the kind that really matters, is rarely that direct. More often, disagreement hides behind social politeness. It expresses itself not through words, but through subtle behavioral signals that most people completely miss. These are resistance signals, and learning to detect them will give you an enormous advantage in every conversation you have. Here's what resistance looks like when it doesn't want to be seen. Delayed agreement. Someone says, "Yeah, sure," but not immediately. There's a beat of hesitation first, a fraction of a second where the "yeah" wasn't ready yet. That delay is the mind wrestling with genuine disagreement before social conditioning produces the expected response. Partial responses. Instead of a full, engaged answer, you get something truncated, clipped, efficient, but empty. I guess, if you say so. These responses carry the form of agreement, but lack the substance. The words agree. The energy doesn't. Topic redirection. Instead of engaging with what you said, the person shifts the conversation somewhere else. Not dramatically, subtly, a slight pivot to a related but different topic. This is the mind avoiding confrontation by steering the conversation toward safer ground. Physical micro-resistance, a slight lean backward, a subtle head tilt, a barely noticeable tightening of the jaw, arms that were open beginning to close. These are the body's way of saying, "I don't fully accept this," without the mouth having to get involved. Verbal agreement with physical disagreement. This is the most common and most telling form of resistance. Someone says, "I agree," or "that makes sense," but their body tells a different story. They nod, but the nod is quick and performative rather than slow and genuine. They smile, but the smile is thin, not reaching the eyes. They verbally align, but their body creates distance. Here's why detecting resistance matters so much. If you only listen to words, you might walk away thinking everyone agrees with you. But if you read the resistance signals, you know the truth. Someone has reservations they didn't express. And that unspoken disagreement? It doesn't just disappear. It festers. It grows. It eventually surfaces in ways that are far more destructive than if it had been addressed in the moment. So when you detect resistance signals, don't ignore them. And don't call them out aggressively either. That creates defensiveness. Instead, create space. Ask a gentle follow-up question. Something like, I want to make sure I'm considering all perspectives. Does anything about this feel off to you? Or simply, what are you thinking? These invitations give people permission to share what they were holding back. And when they do, you've just prevented a future conflict by catching a present one. Now, let's bring everything in this section together with something that elevates all of your skills. Advanced pattern recognition. Everything we've discussed, emotional layering, conversational dynamics, consistency breaks, mirroring, resistance signals, these are individual tools, powerful on their own, but transcendent when combined. Advanced pattern recognition is the ability to track multiple behavioral streams simultaneously and synthesize them into coherent understanding, not consciously analyzing each element separately. That's too slow, too mechanical, too obvious. But allowing your trained awareness to absorb the full picture and let meaning emerge naturally. It's like listening to an orchestra. A beginner hears music, just one combined sound. A trained musician hears individual instruments within the music, the violin doing one thing, the cello doing another, the flute weaving through both. An advanced musician doesn't just hear the instruments, they hear the relationships between instruments, how they complement each other, how they create tension, how they resolve. You're becoming that advanced listener of human behavior, not hearing just one signal, not even hearing individual signals separately, but hearing the relationships between signals, how body language relates to vocal tone, how timing relates to emotional state, how consistency breaks relate to topic changes, how mirroring patterns relate to trust levels. And here's what happens when you reach this level. Understanding becomes intuitive. You walk into a room and you just know the energy. You enter a conversation and you feel the dynamics without having to catalog every signal. You sense tension before it becomes conflict. You notice disconnection before it becomes distance. You recognize genuine engagement versus performative participation without needing to think about it. This isn't magic. This is pattern recognition, operating at a level where conscious analysis becomes unnecessary. Your brain has absorbed enough data, processed enough examples, and refined enough understanding that the work happens automatically. But here's the honest truth. This takes time. It takes practice. It takes patience with yourself when you misread things. Because you will misread things. Every skilled observer has made mistakes. Every expert started as a beginner who got things wrong. The difference between someone who develops this skill and someone who doesn't isn't talent. It isn't natural ability. It isn't some genetic gift for reading people. It's persistence. It's the willingness to keep observing, keep noticing, keep refining your understanding through the messy, imperfect process of real human interaction. And let me tell you something encouraging. You don't need to reach perfection. Even a modest improvement in your ability to read behavioral patterns creates a massive advantage. Catching even half the signals you used to miss puts you ahead of the vast majority of people. Noticing resistant signals even occasionally prevents conflicts you would have walked into blindly. Sensing emotional shifts even sometimes allows you to respond with empathy at moments when others would respond with confusion. So don't pressure yourself to be perfect. Pressure yourself to be present. Because presence is the real skill underneath all of this. Every technique, every principle, every concept you've learned is just a way of being more fully, more completely present in the moment with another human being. And that simple, profound, deeply human presence is the greatest communication skill that exists. Let's go deeper, because the final layers of understanding await, and they're going to tie everything together in a way that makes human behavior feel less like a mystery and more like a language you're finally learning to speak fluently. You've come a long way. And I don't just mean through this material, I mean internally. Something inside you has genuinely shifted. The way you think about people, the way you process conversations, the way you experience the invisible world of human emotion, all of it is different now. You're seeing layers where you used to see surfaces. You're sensing rhythm where you used to hear noise. You're reading chapters where you used to catch scattered words. And now, in this final stretch, we're going to bring everything together, every concept, every principle, every tool you've learned. They're all going to connect into one unified understanding, a complete framework for reading human behavior that you'll carry with you for the rest of your life. But before we dive in, I want you to understand something important about where you are right now. You're standing at a threshold that most people never reach. Not because the information isn't available, it is, but because most people stop too early. They learn a few tricks, read a few signals, and think that's enough. They stay at the surface because the surface feels impressive enough. But you didn't stop. You kept going. And because of that, what I'm about to share with you will land differently than it would have at the beginning. Because now you have the foundation to truly understand it, not just intellectually, but experientially, in your bones. Let's begin with something that changes how you experience every single human interaction from this moment forward. Interpersonal emotional calibration. Every time two people interact, every single time without exception, they enter into an invisible process of mutual adjustment. Both people simultaneously are calibrating to each other, adjusting tone, matching energy, reading emotional temperature, deciding how much to reveal, deciding how much to hold back, testing the waters of trust, gauging safety levels, all of this happening in real time, mostly below conscious awareness. Think of it like two radios trying to find the same frequency. At first, there might be static, awkward pauses, mismatched energy, uncertain pacing. But as the conversation progresses, both people adjust their dials. They find each other's rhythm. The static clears, communication smooths out, connection forms, or it doesn't. Sometimes the frequencies never align. The conversation stays uncomfortable. The energy remains mismatched. Neither person can find the right adjustment. And when that happens, both people walk away feeling like something was off, even if they can't explain what. This calibration process is the invisible foundation of every conversation you've ever had. And here's what makes understanding it so powerful. Once you can see the calibration happening in real time, you gain the ability to influence it consciously. You can adjust your own frequency to match someone else's. You can slow down when they need space, speed up when they need energy, soften when they need safety, stabilize when they need grounding. This isn't manipulation. This is emotional intelligence in action. You're not controlling the other person. You're creating conditions where genuine connection becomes possible. And that distinction matters enormously. Now, there's a crucial element within calibration that most people overlook entirely. It's this. Calibration is not a one-time event. It's continuous. Throughout an entire conversation, both people are constantly recalibrating. A topic change requires recalibration. An emotional shift requires recalibration. A new person entering the conversation requires recalibration. Even a moment of silence requires recalibration. And here's what this means practically. You can never stop observing, not in an exhausting, hypervigilant way. That defeats the purpose. But in a relaxed, flowing, present way, like a surfer reading the ocean. You don't analyze every wave individually. You feel the rhythm. You sense when something is shifting. You adjust naturally, fluidly, without forcing it. That's what skilled emotional calibration looks like. Not mechanical analysis. Fluid awareness. And it becomes more natural every time you practice it. Let's move deeper now into behavioral adaptation and why understanding it prevents one of the most common mistakes in reading people. Here's something you need to accept fully. People are not fixed entities. They are adaptive systems. The same person can behave completely differently in different contexts, and neither version is fake. Both are real. Both are authentic expressions of the same person under different conditions. Your friend who is loud and hilarious at dinner parties might be quiet and reserved at work. Your colleague who seems cold and efficient in meetings might be warm and deeply caring with their children. Your partner who appears confident in social settings might feel deeply insecure when they're alone with their thoughts. None of these are contradictions. They are adaptations. Different environments activate different emotional states, and different emotional states produce different behaviors. This is not people being fake or inconsistent. This is the natural flexibility of the human emotional system. And here's why this matters for reading people. If you only see someone in one context, you're only seeing one adaptation, one slice of who they are. And if you build your entire understanding of that person based on that single slice, you'll be surprised, maybe even confused, when you see them in a different environment behaving differently. The skilled observer understands this. They hold their interpretations loosely. They recognize that what they're seeing is context-dependent. They don't say, this person is cold. They say, this person is behaving with reserve in this particular situation. The difference seems small, but it's actually enormous. One is a fixed label. The other is a contextual observation. And contextual observations are far more accurate. So remember this principle. Never define someone entirely by how they behave in a single context. You're not seeing all of them. You're seeing the version of them that this particular environment has activated. And somewhere in a different room with different people Under different conditions, a different version exists. Neither is more real than the other. Both are genuine expressions of a complex human being. Now, let's go into something that explains why certain conversations feel effortless and others feel exhausting, even when the topic is the same. Emotional bandwidth. Every person has a limited capacity for emotional processing at any given moment. Think of it like bandwidth on a network. When bandwidth is high, when someone is rested, emotionally balanced, and free from major stressors, they can process complex emotional information easily. They can listen fully, respond thoughtfully, engage deeply, and handle nuance without difficulty. But when bandwidth is low, when someone is stressed, exhausted, overwhelmed, or distracted, their capacity for emotional processing shrinks dramatically. They hear words but miss meaning. They respond but without depth. They engage but only partially. Nuance gets lost. Subtlety goes unnoticed. Emotional signals that they would normally catch fly right past them. This is why timing matters so much in important conversations. You could say the exact same thing to the same person at two different times and get completely different responses. Not because they feel differently about the topic, but because their emotional bandwidth was different in each moment. Here's a practical application. If you need to have an important conversation with someone, something sensitive, something that requires their full emotional engagement, pay attention to their bandwidth first. Are they stressed, distracted, overwhelmed, exhausted? If so, that conversation will not land the way you need it to. Not because they don't care, because they literally don't have the capacity to process it fully right now. Wait for a moment of higher bandwidth, when they're calmer, when they're more present, when their emotional reserves are fuller. The same words will produce a completely different result. And here's the flip side. When you notice someone whose bandwidth is clearly low, short answers, reduced eye contact, less emotional expressiveness, don't take it personally. Don't assume they've lost interest in you or the conversation. They might simply be running on empty. Their battery is low. And recognizing that instead of interpreting it as rejection is an act of emotional intelligence that will serve you incredibly well. Now, let's explore something that binds everything we've discussed into a dynamic, flowing process. Conversational flow. A conversation is not a series of disconnected exchanges. It's a living, breathing, evolving system. It has rhythm, it has momentum, it has energy that rises and falls like waves, and the quality of that flow determines the quality of the entire interaction. When flow is strong, conversations feel natural, words come easily, silences feel comfortable. Both people feel engaged and understood. There's a warmth, a musicality, an almost effortless quality to the exchange. When flow is disrupted, conversations feel fragmented, awkward, choppy. Responses feel forced. Pauses feel uncomfortable. Energy becomes inconsistent. Something is off, and both people can feel it even if neither can articulate what went wrong. Here's the key insight. Flow disruptions almost always have emotional origins. They're rarely about the topic itself. They're about something that shifted emotionally, a comment that landed wrong, a tone that felt off, a topic that triggered discomfort, a moment of disconnection that broke the rhythm. And once you start recognizing flow disruptions as emotional signals rather than conversational accidents, you gain the ability to repair them in real time. you can acknowledge the shift without making it dramatic. Simple. I feel like something just changed. Are you okay? Can be enough to restore flow. Or even more subtly, you can adjust your own energy, soften your tone, slow your pace, ask a warmer question, and create space for the flow to return naturally. This is where all of your skills converge. Baseline awareness tells you when the flow has changed. Cluster reading confirms the shift is real. Emotional calibration helps you adjust. And the result is a conversation that recovers and deepens instead of one that derails and disconnects. Now let's layer in something that shapes every conversation from beginning to end, often without either person realizing it. Emotional carry. Emotional carry is the principle that emotions don't reset between moments. They carry forward. What someone feels at the beginning of a conversation continues to influence everything that follows, even if the topic changes completely. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're meeting a friend for coffee. Before they arrived, they had a frustrating phone call with a family member. By the time they sit down across from you, that frustration is still active in their system. They might not mention it. They might not even be fully aware of it. But that emotional residue is coloring everything. Their tone, their patience, their responsiveness, their energy level. And if you don't understand emotional carry, you might interpret their slightly shorter answers or their reduced enthusiasm as something about you. Are they upset with me? Did I do something wrong? Are they losing interest in our friendship? None of that is true. They're just carrying emotional weight from a completely unrelated situation. This happens constantly. People bring emotional carry from morning commutes into work meetings, from work stress into evening dinners, from unresolved arguments into new conversations, from childhood experiences into adult relationships. Emotional carry is everywhere, and it affects everything. Understanding this concept does two powerful things. First, it prevents you from taking things personally that aren't personal. When someone seems off, it might have absolutely nothing to do with you. They're carrying something. And recognizing that possibility, even without knowing what they're carrying, allows you to respond with compassion instead of defensiveness. Second, it helps you understand why early moments in conversation matter so much. The emotional tone set in the first few minutes often carries through the entire interaction. If someone feels judged early, that judgment carries forward. If they feel welcomed early, that warmth carries forward. If they feel dismissed early, that dismissal carries forward. The beginning doesn't just start the conversation. It establishes the emotional track that everything else runs on. So be intentional about beginnings, not performatively, genuinely. The first moments of a conversation are where emotional carry is either created or dissolved. A warm greeting, genuine eye contact, authentic presence. These don't just feel nice. They set the emotional foundation for everything that follows. Now, let's delve into something that becomes increasingly important as your observation skills sharpen. Self-monitoring behavior. As people become aware, even slightly, that they're being observed or evaluated, their behavior changes. They begin monitoring themselves more carefully, choosing words more deliberately, managing facial expressions more consciously, controlling body language with more intention. This is natural and universal. Everyone does it. But here's what it means for you as an observer. The more someone monitors themselves, the less spontaneous their behavior becomes. And the less spontaneous, the harder to read accurately, because you're no longer seeing their natural responses. You're seeing their managed presentation. This is why the best observers are the ones who don't look like they're observing. When someone feels watched, they perform. When they feel simply engaged with, they relax. And relaxed people produce far more honest behavioral signals than performing ones. So here's a paradox you need to embrace. The more skilled you become at reading people, the more important it becomes to appear completely natural while doing it, not as deception, as courtesy. Because the moment you make someone feel analyzed, you've compromised the very data you're trying to read. Be warm, be present, be genuinely engaged in the conversation, not just in the analysis of it. Let your observation be a quiet background process, not a visible operation. The best reading happens when the other person has no idea they're being read, not because you're hiding something, because they feel safe enough to be real. Now, let's talk about something that ties into every concept we've covered. Emotional consistency, and why it's one of the most reliable indicators of authenticity you'll ever find. When someone is being genuinely authentic, when their words match their emotions, match their intentions, you see consistency across all channels. Their verbal message aligns with their tone. Their tone aligns with their facial expression. Their expression aligns with their body language. Their body language aligns with their energy. Everything points in the same direction. Everything resonates with the same emotional truth. This consistency feels unmistakable. You experience it as trust, as warmth, as genuine connection. When someone is truly congruent, you feel safe with them, often without knowing why. It's because your brain is detecting alignment across all channels and interpreting it as authenticity. But when consistency breaks, when one channel says something different from another, your brain detects that too. You experience it as unease, as doubt, as that nagging feeling that something isn't quite right. And that detection, that gut sense of misalignment, is one of the most valuable signals you'll ever receive. Now, I want to be clear about something. Inconsistency doesn't automatically mean dishonesty. It can mean internal conflict, someone who genuinely isn't sure how they feel. It can mean emotional layering, someone who feels multiple things simultaneously. It can mean social adaptation, someone adjusting their presentation to fit perceived expectations. It can mean processing delay, someone whose emotions haven't fully caught up with their words yet. The point isn't to assume the worst when you detect inconsistency. The point is to notice it, to hold it gently, to let it inform your understanding without jumping to conclusions. Because inconsistency is always a door to deeper understanding, but only if you walk through it with curiosity rather than judgment. Let's move into something that many people experience but few people understand. Interaction momentum. Every conversation has momentum, a direction and energy that builds over time. Sometimes momentum is positive. Engagement increases, trust deepens, connection strengthens, openness grows. The conversation feels like it's going somewhere meaningful. Sometimes momentum is negative. Tension builds, distance increases, responses shorten, energy drops. The conversation feels like it's slowly collapsing. And sometimes Momentum is neutral, pleasant but not progressing, comfortable but not deepening, safe but not connecting. The conversation maintains itself without moving in any particular direction. Here's what most people don't realize. Momentum is incredibly sensitive to small events. A single comment can shift positive momentum to negative. A single moment of genuine empathy can shift negative momentum to positive. A single question, asked at the right time, in the right tone, can transform a stalled conversation into a deeply connecting one. This sensitivity means you have more influence over conversational outcomes than you probably realize. Not through manipulation, through awareness, by noticing when momentum is shifting and responding intentionally rather than reactively. For example, if you notice positive momentum starting to slow, engagement dipping slightly, energy declining, responses becoming less elaborate, you can gently re-engage. Ask a question that invites deeper sharing. Share something genuine about yourself. Acknowledge something specific that the other person said. These small acts of intentional engagement can restore momentum that was beginning to fade. Conversely, if you notice negative momentum building, tension increasing, defensive signals appearing, flow disrupting, you can intervene before it escalates. Slow down your pace, soften your tone, acknowledge the tension without dramatizing it. Create a moment of emotional space. These adjustments can redirect a conversation that was heading toward conflict back toward understanding. Now, here's something powerful that I want you to really absorb. The ultimate purpose of everything you've learned, this entire journey, from baseline observation to microexpressions, from emotional safety to behavioral adaptation, from cluster reading to interaction momentum, all of it serves one purpose: not to make you a human lie detector, not to give you power over others, not to make you suspicious of everyone around you. The purpose is understanding. Deep, genuine, compassionate understanding of the people in your life. Because here's what happens when you truly understand someone. Conflict doesn't escalate. It resolves. Distance doesn't grow. It closes. Misunderstandings don't fester. They dissolve. Fear doesn't dominate. Trust does. When you can see what someone is feeling beneath their words, you can respond to their actual need, not just their stated message. When you can sense that someone is scared, you can offer safety instead of logic. When you can feel that someone is struggling, you can offer support instead of advice. When you can tell that someone disagrees but is afraid to say so, you can create space for their honesty instead of assuming their silence means agreement. This is not just a skill. This is a way of being, a way of showing up for the people in your life with a depth of presence that most people have never experienced. And when you offer someone that kind of presence, that genuine, attentive, non-judgmental presence, you give them something rare and precious. You give them the experience of feeling truly seen. And in a world where so many people feel invisible, where people walk through their days feeling misunderstood, unnoticed, alone, even in crowded rooms, being the person who truly sees, that's not just powerful, that's transformative for them and for you. Now, as we approach the end of this journey, I want to share some truths that will keep your skills grounded and growing. First, accept imperfection. You will misread signals. You will make incorrect assumptions. You will sometimes project your own emotions onto others. You will occasionally see patterns that aren't there. This is normal. This is part of the process. Every master observer has a history of mistakes. What separates them from beginners isn't the absence of errors. It's the willingness to learn from them and keep refining. Second, stay humble. The moment you think you completely figured someone out is the moment you stop seeing them clearly. People are complex. People change. People surprise you. And that unpredictability isn't a failure of your reading skills. It's a feature of human nature. Hold your interpretations loosely. Stay open to being wrong. Stay curious enough to keep looking even when you think you found the answer. Third, prioritize connection over analysis. It can be tempting, once you develop these skills, to treat conversations as observation exercises, to analyze constantly, to assess everyone you meet. But that approach turns people into puzzles to solve rather than humans to connect with. And that misses the entire point. The goal is not to analyze people. The goal is to understand them. And understanding requires warmth, not just observation. Empathy, not just pattern recognition. Genuine care, not just accurate assessment. Let your skills serve your relationships, not replace them. Fourth, use your awareness to give, not just to take. Yes, understanding behavior gives you an advantage, but the highest use of that advantage isn't personal gain, it's service. Use your awareness to make others feel seen. Use it to create safer conversations. Use it to ask better questions. Use it to hold space for honesty. Use it to reduce unnecessary suffering in your relationships. That's the real power, not what you get from understanding people. What you give because you understand them. And fifth, and this might be the most important one, develop your self-awareness alongside your people awareness, because the two are inseparable. Every bias you hold about yourself will distort how you see others. Every blind spot you have about your own behavior will create a blind spot in reading others. Every emotion you refuse to acknowledge in yourself will be harder to recognize in someone else. The best readers of human behavior are not those who study others obsessively. They are those who understand themselves deeply, their triggers, their patterns, their fears, their defenses, their emotional rhythms, and use that self-knowledge as a foundation for understanding everyone else. Because here's the beautiful truth at the center of all of this. We're all running the same operating system, different experiences, different triggers, different expressions, but the same fundamental emotional architecture underneath. The same need for safety, the same desire for connection, the same fear of rejection, the same longing to be understood. And once you really see that, really, truly see it, you stop judging people for their behavior and start understanding the emotional logic behind it. You stop being surprised by human complexity and start appreciating it. You stop trying to categorize people and start meeting them where they are. That's the ultimate skill, not reading minds, meeting hearts. Now, let me give you something to carry forward, a simple framework you can use in any conversation, any interaction, any moment of human connection. Observe without judging. Notice what you see, but resist the urge to label it immediately. Let signals accumulate. Let patterns form naturally. Don't rush to conclusions. Look for clusters, not singles. Never base your understanding on one signal. Wait for multiple signals to converge before forming an interpretation. Track changes, not states. A single behavior means little. A change in behavior means everything. Watch for shifts, not snapshots. Check your own lens. Before interpreting someone else, check your own emotional state. Are you projecting? Are you biased by your own mood? Are you seeing them clearly or seeing them through your own filter? Respond to emotion, not just words. When you detect what someone is feeling beneath their words, respond to the feeling. That's where real connection happens. Create safety. The more emotionally safe someone feels, the more authentically they behave. And the more authentically they behave, the more accurately you can understand them. Safety isn't just kindness, it's strategic awareness. Stay present. Presence is the foundation of everything. Without it, no technique works. With it, every observation becomes clearer, every signal becomes stronger, every connection becomes deeper. And finally, practice patience. This is not a skill you master overnight. It's a skill you develop over a lifetime. Every conversation is practice. Every interaction is a learning opportunity. Every person you meet teaches you something new about human behavior, if you're willing to pay attention. So here's where you stand now. You understand baseline behavior and why it matters. You know how to read clusters instead of isolated signals. You recognize emotional congruence and what happens when it breaks. You can detect microexpressions and understand their significance. You read body orientation, proximity, and touch as emotional channels. You listen to voice quality and vocal shifts as carriers of hidden emotion. You understand timing and what delays, pauses, and hesitations reveal. You grasp the foundational role of emotional safety in shaping all behavior. You recognize self-soothing behaviors as indicators of internal discomfort. You understand emotional projection and why self-awareness is essential for accuracy. You know how perception triggers create disproportionate reactions. You understand the brain's need for control in the face of uncertainty. You read emotional pacing and know what rhythm disruptions mean. You see the difference between reactions and responses and know which is more revealing. You understand emotional layering and why mixed signals are actually multi-layered truths. You read conversational dynamics and invisible power structures. You detect consistency breaks and know they always have internal causes. You appreciate the beauty and significance of emotional mirroring. You spot resistance signals hiding behind social politeness. You've developed the foundations of advanced pattern recognition. And now you understand interpersonal calibration, behavioral adaptation, emotional bandwidth, conversational flow, interaction momentum, emotional carry, self-monitoring effects, and the deep relationship between self-awareness and people awareness. That's not a collection of techniques. That's a complete system of human understanding, and it's yours now. But remember, and this is truly the last thing I'll say, all of this knowledge means nothing if it stays intellectual. It only becomes powerful when it moves from your mind into your practice. When you carry it into real conversations, when you apply it with real people, when you let it change how you listen, how you respond, how you connect. Because knowledge without practice is just entertainment. And what you've learned here is too important, too transformative, too valuable to be reduced to entertainment. This is meant to change how you experience human connection, and it will if you let it. So go out there, into your next conversation, into your next meeting, into your next dinner with a friend, your next phone call with family, your next interaction with a stranger, and bring everything you've learned with you, not as a tool to use on people, as a gift to offer them, the gift of being truly, deeply, completely seen. Because in the end, that's what reading minds really is. Not magic, not manipulation, not tricks or tactics. It's the profound, deeply human act of paying attention, full, genuine, compassionate attention to the people in your life. And once you do that, conversations will never feel the same again. Not because people changed, because you did. There's one more layer I want to share with you before we close this journey. And it might be the most important one of all. Because everything you've learned, every signal, every pattern, every principle, ultimately leads to this single truth. Emotional truth is never found in one place. It's distributed across everything a person does. Think about that for a moment. You will never find the full truth of what someone feels in a single glance, a single sentence, a single gesture, a single pause. Emotional truth doesn't live in isolation. It lives in accumulation. It reveals itself gradually across time, across contexts, across moments of pressure and moments of ease. It shows up in the relationship between what someone says and how they say it, in the gap between their first reaction and their chosen response, in the pattern of what they consistently return to and what they consistently avoid. This is why the best readers of human behavior are patient. They don't rush to label. They don't grab the first signal and build a verdict. They collect. They observe. They wait for the picture to develop, like a photograph slowly appearing in a dark room. Edges first, shapes next, details last. And only when enough has emerged do they trust what they see. And here's something beautiful about that patience. It protects you from one of the most dangerous traps in reading people: confirmation bias. That tendency to notice only what supports what you already believe. If you decide someone is untrustworthy, you'll start seeing evidence of untrustworthiness everywhere, even where it doesn't exist. If you decide someone likes you, you'll interpret ambiguous signals as affection, even when they're not. Patience disrupts that bias. When you slow down, when you let multiple signals accumulate before forming a conclusion, you give reality a chance to speak louder than your assumptions. And reality, when you truly listen to it, is almost always more nuanced, more complex, and more interesting than whatever story your bias was trying to tell. Now, let's talk about something that will serve you in every difficult conversation you'll ever have: emotional anticipation. People don't just react to what's happening, they react to what they expect will happen next. And this anticipation shapes behavior before anything actually occurs. Think about someone walking into a job interview. Before the first question is even asked, their behavior has already changed. Their posture is more controlled, their speech is more careful, their energy is managed. Why? Because they're anticipating evaluation. They're responding not to a present threat, but to an expected one. This happens everywhere. Someone who expects criticism becomes defensive before any criticism arrives. Someone who expects acceptance relaxes before any acceptance is offered. Someone who expects conflict becomes guarded before any conflict begins. And here's why this matters for you. When you notice someone behaving defensively, cautiously, or with unusual tension, before anything has actually gone wrong in the conversation, you might be witnessing anticipation, not reaction. They're not responding to you. They're responding to what they think is coming. And understanding that distinction changes how you respond. Instead of matching their defensiveness with your own, you can disarm it with warmth. Instead of reacting to their tension, you can dissolve it with safety. Instead of escalating the very conflict they're anticipating, you can prove their expectation wrong. And when you do that, when someone braces for judgment and receives understanding instead, something extraordinary happens. Their entire emotional architecture shifts. Walls come down that have been standing for years. Trust appears where suspicion lived. And a conversation that was headed for disconnection transforms into genuine connection. That's the power of reading anticipation, not just seeing what people feel, but understanding what they expect and choosing to respond in a way that creates a better outcome than the one they feared. Now, there's one final skill I want to give you, and it's not a technique. It's a way of being. Emotional presence. Throughout everything we've covered, one thread has remained constant. Presence. The ability to be fully, completely, undividedly here, in this conversation, with this person, in this moment. Not thinking about what you'll say next. Not analyzing every signal in real time. Not mentally preparing your response while they're still talking. Just being here, fully, with your complete attention and your open heart. Because here's what I've learned, and what I hope you'll carry with you forever. All the techniques in the world, every principle, every framework, every pattern recognition skill, they all become secondary to one thing: the quality of your presence. When you are truly present with another human being, something almost magical happens. Not magical in a mystical sense, magical in a deeply human sense. They feel it. They feel seen. They feel heard. They feel that rare, precious experience of being with someone who is actually with them. Not distracted, not performing, not analyzing, but genuinely, warmly, fully there. And in that presence, the most remarkable thing happens. People reveal themselves naturally, not because you detected their microexpressions, not because you read their body language perfectly, not because you caught every vocal shift and timing pattern, but because your presence created a space safe enough for them to simply be themselves. That's the ultimate paradox of reading people. The more you chase signals, the more guarded people become. But the more you simply show up, present, warm, genuinely interested, the more freely people express who they really are. The best observation doesn't look like observation at all. It looks like love. So here's my invitation to you. Take everything you've learned, every tool, every principle, every insight. Hold them lightly. Let them inform your awareness without dominating your attention. Let them deepen your understanding without replacing your compassion. Let them make you more perceptive without making you less warm. Because the world doesn't need more analysts. It doesn't need more human lie detectors or behavioral profilers or people who pride themselves on seeing through others. The world needs more people who see into others with kindness, with depth, with genuine care. That's what you're becoming, not someone who reads minds, someone who understands hearts. And that, more than any technique I could ever teach you, is the skill that will change your life and the lives of everyone fortunate enough to know you. You started this journey hearing words. You're ending it understanding people. And that transformation quiet, internal, profound, is something no one can ever take from you. So go forward into your next conversation, into your next relationship, into every room you enter for the rest of your life, and bring this awareness with you, not as armor, not as a weapon, as a gift, the gift of truly seeing another human being. Because in the end, after all the signals and patterns and principles and techniques, that's what reading minds really comes down to. One person deciding to pay attention to another, fully, honestly, with everything they have. And once that decision becomes a habit, you'll never experience a conversation the same way again. Not because the world changed, because you opened your eyes. And what you see now, what you'll always see from this point forward, is something extraordinary. People, in all their complexity, in all their beauty, in all their messy, layered, contradictory, deeply human truth. And you'll understand them, not perfectly, but deeply. And deeply is more than enough.